Have you ever wondered why some people seem endlessly patient until one day they disappear forever? Most people think an empath is weak because they forgive. They believe kindness means vulnerability. They mistake compassion for surrender. That assumption is one of the biggest psychological mistakes you can make because an empath rarely breaks in the moment. They break after thousands of moments, after hundreds of ignored boundaries, after countless nights questioning themselves instead of questioning the person hurting them. And when that breaking point finally arrives, the consequences can shock everyone involved. Today, we're exploring the psychology behind why you should never break an empath and why the aftermath often feels brutal, not because empaths seek revenge, but because human psychology changes dramatically once chronic emotional stress reaches its limit. Let's begin. Psychologists often describe empathy as the ability to understand and share another person's emotional experience. Highly empathic individuals usually score higher in emotional awareness, perspective taking, and compassion. These qualities make them exceptional partners, friends, parents, and coworkers. But these same strengths create an unexpected vulnerability. Empaths naturally search for explanations instead of accusations. Instead of asking, "Why are they hurting me?" they ask, "What pain are they carrying?" That single difference changes everything. While most people pull away after repeated disrespect, empaths often move closer, believing more understanding will solve the problem. This pattern isn't weakness. It's called compassionate responding. Unfortunately, manipulative individuals often interpret this as unlimited tolerance, and that's where the cycle begins. Every criticism gets forgiven. Every broken promise receives another chance. Every emotional withdrawal is explained away. Over time, something dangerous happens inside the empath's brain. Stress hormones remain elevated for longer periods. Emotional exhaustion accumulates. The nervous system stays on constant alert, scanning for conflict while simultaneously trying to preserve the relationship. Research on chronic interpersonal stress suggests prolonged emotional strain can alter attention, emotional regulation, sleep quality, and decision making. The empath doesn't suddenly become different, they become depleted. Here's the fascinating part. The people causing the damage usually don't notice the warning signs. Because empaths rarely explode, they become quieter. They stop arguing. They stop defending themselves. No one wakes up one morning and decides they are done with someone they once loved. The human brain simply doesn't work that way. Relationships rarely collapse because of a single argument. Often they unravel through hundreds of moments so small they seem invisible on their own. A sarcastic comment dismissed as a joke, a promise quietly broken, an apology that never comes, a boundary crossed just one more time. Each incident appears insignificant, but neuroscience suggests our brains are constantly recording emotional experiences, searching for patterns that tell us whether we are safe, valued, and understood. This is where many people misunderstand highly empathic individuals. They mistake patience for limitless tolerance. They see forgiveness and assume nothing is wrong. They interpret silence as acceptance. In reality, silence can be one of the loudest warning signs of emotional exhaustion. Psychologists have long understood that empathy is a remarkable human ability. It allows us to recognize another person's emotional state, understand their perspective, and respond with compassion. These qualities strengthen friendships, marriages, families, and entire communities. But empathy also carries a hidden cost. People who are deeply invested in understanding others sometimes delay protecting themselves. Instead of immediately confronting harmful behavior, they search for explanations. Instead of asking, "Why would someone treat me this way?" they ask, "What pain might they be carrying?" That compassionate instinct can preserve relationships, but it can also keep someone in emotionally unhealthy situations longer than they should remain. Imagine carrying a glass of water. At first, it feels almost weightless. Hold it for 5 minutes and your arm begins to ache. Hold it for an hour and the pain becomes impossible to ignore. The water never became heavier, your muscles simply became exhausted. Emotional stress works in remarkably similar ways. It is often not the size of one painful event that overwhelms us, it is the accumulated weight of countless unresolved experiences. Researchers studying chronic stress have found that when people experience ongoing emotional strain without adequate recovery, the body's stress response can remain activated for extended periods. Hormones such as cortisol, which are essential for responding to immediate threats, can become dysregulated when stress is prolonged. Over time, this has been associated with poorer sleep, difficulty concentrating, increased anxiety, emotional fatigue, and even physical health problems. The body does not always distinguish between a physical threat and persistent emotional conflict. To the nervous system, uncertainty itself can become exhausting. This explains something many people never notice. The person who appears calm may actually be fighting the hardest battle. They are smiling while mentally replaying conversations. They are working while carrying emotional disappointment. They are laughing with friends while privately wondering why they are never enough for someone they care about. From the outside, everything seems normal. Inside, their nervous system may be working overtime. One of the most fascinating discoveries in psychology is that the brain is constantly making predictions about the future based on repeated experiences. If someone repeatedly feels dismissed, ignored, or criticized, the brain begins anticipating those outcomes before they even happen. This isn't weakness, it is an adaptive survival mechanism. The brain learns from repetition. It asks one question above all others: what should I expect next? If the answer is disappointment often enough, hope gradually gives way to caution. This shift rarely announces itself with dramatic speeches or emotional confrontations. It begins quietly. The long conversations become shorter, the excitement fades, the laughter feels forced. The person who once shared every thought now keeps their feelings to themselves, not because they no longer care, but because experience has taught them that sharing may not change anything. This is where people often make a devastating mistake. They assume fewer complaints mean the relationship is improving. In reality, fewer complaints can mean the opposite. At times, the person has simply stopped believing they will be heard. Relationship researchers have observed that emotional withdrawal can be a powerful predictor of relational distress. When people stop trying to repair problems, it is often because they have lost confidence that repair is possible. Think about that for a moment. The loudest warning sign is not always anger. Sometimes it is the absence of it. When someone still argues, they are often revealing that they believe the relationship is worth saving. But when they become emotionally quiet, something deeper may be happening. They are conserving energy. They are protecting themselves from repeated disappointment. Their emotional investment is slowly being redirected towards survival instead of connection. The human brain is remarkably efficient. It cannot remain in a state of emotional conflict forever. Eventually, it begins adapting. Memories that once triggered intense emotion become less powerful, expectations become smaller. Emotional distance grows, not because the heart suddenly becomes cold, but because the mind is trying to reduce ongoing psychological pain. This process can surprise everyone involved. Friends may wonder why the change seems so sudden. Family members may ask what happened. Even the other person in the relationship may insist. Everything seemed fine, but nothing changed overnight. The change was happening quietly beneath the surface, one experience at a time, long before anyone recognized it. There is another important truth that often goes unnoticed. Chronic emotional stress affects more than feelings. Research links prolonged stress with disrupted sleep, reduced immune function, difficulties with attention and memory, and increased risk of anxiety and depression. The emotional burden people carry can leave measurable effects on both mind and body. What begins as repeated emotional disappointment can eventually influence overall well-being. Yet, the story does not end there. The same brain that learns from repeated hurt can also heal through repeated safety. Healthy relationships, consistent respect, supportive friendships, restorative sleep, physical activity, mindfulness practices, and professional therapy when needed can all help regulate the nervous system and rebuild a sense of emotional security. The brain remains capable of change throughout life, of quality known as neuroplasticity. New experiences can gradually reshape old expectations. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: no one reaches their breaking point because they are weak. More often, they reach it because they have carried emotional weight for far longer than anyone realized. What appears to outsiders as a sudden ending is often the final chapter of a story that has been unfolding silently for months or even years. The strongest people are not those who never feel pain. They are the ones who continue showing kindness while quietly carrying burdens others cannot see. But strength also means recognizing when compassion must include yourself, because there comes a moment when healing no longer begins with changing another person. It begins with believing that your own emotional well-being deserves the same care, patience, and understanding that you have always been willing to give everyone else. There is a moment in some relationships that almost no one notices. There are no slammed doors, no dramatic speeches, no explosive arguments. Everything looks the same on the outside, yet something profound has changed beneath the surface. The person who once invested endless emotional energy has quietly stopped expecting things to be different. This moment is not revenge. It is often emotional detachment, a psychological response that can emerge after prolonged disappointment, repeated hurt, or chronic stress. Many people misunderstand what emotional detachment really is. They imagine it as becoming cold, heartless, or incapable of love. But psychology paints a more nuanced picture. Emotional detachment is often the mind's attempt to reduce ongoing emotional pain when previous efforts to repair a relationship have repeatedly failed. It is not necessarily the absence of feeling. Instead, it can be the gradual withdrawal of emotional investment from a situation that has become psychologically exhausting. Think about how the human body reacts to touching a hot surface. Your hand pulls away before you consciously think about it. This protective response isn't punishment directed at the heat. It is your nervous system trying to prevent further injury. Our emotional lives can work in surprisingly similar ways. When someone repeatedly experiences disappointment, criticism, rejection, or unpredictability, the mind begins searching for ways to reduce future harm. Sometimes, that means creating emotional distance. One of the brain's primary responsibilities is survival. It constantly evaluates whether people and environments feel safe or threatening. Neuroscientists have found that emotionally painful experiences activate many of the same brain regions involved in processing physical pain. Although emotional pain and physical injury are not identical, the overlap helps explain why heartbreak, rejection, and chronic conflict can feel so intensely real. The brain treats social connection as something deeply important to human well-being. Imagine trying to keep a candle burning during a relentless storm. At first, you shield the flame with your hands, then you search for better cover, then you use everything around you to protect it. But if the storm never stops, eventually your energy runs out. The goal was never to extinguish the flame, the goal was to keep it alive, yet constant exposure eventually changes what is possible. Emotional investment can fade in much the same way, not because someone wanted to stop caring, but because maintaining that level of care became increasingly difficult under constant strain. Researchers who study relationships have consistently found that mutual responsiveness matters. Feeling heard, respected, and emotionally supported contributes to stronger relationships and greater psychological well-being. On the other hand, persistent invalidation, unresolved conflict, or chronic unpredictability can gradually erode trust. Trust rarely disappears all at once. It weakens one experience at a time. That is why emotional detachment often surprises the people who never noticed the slow process leading up to it. They remember the absence of arguments and assume everything was improving. They mistake silence for peace. But silence can sometimes reflect resignation rather than resolution. When people stop raising concerns, it may not be because those concerns have disappeared. It may be because they no longer believe speaking up will make a meaningful difference. This is one of the most misunderstood moments in any relationship. Many assume that conflict is the greatest danger, yet relationship researchers have observed that withdrawal and disengagement can be equally concerning. The person who is still trying to solve problems is demonstrating that they believe change is possible when they stop trying altogether. Something more significant may have shifted inside their expectations. The brain is remarkably adaptable. Through repeated experiences, it updates its predictions about the future. If efforts to reconnect repeatedly end in disappointment, the mind gradually lowers its expectations. This process can reduce emotional intensity over time. What once caused overwhelming sadness may eventually produce acceptance. This change does not mean the original experiences were insignificant. It reflects the brain's capacity to adapt to ongoing circumstances. There is another layer to this story that many overlook. Chronic emotional stress affects more than mood. Scientific research has linked prolonged stress with disrupted sleep, impaired concentration, changes in immune function, increased anxiety, and greater risk for depression. Emotional strain is not simply all in someone's head. It can influence the body as well. Recovery often requires more than deciding to move on. It may involve restoring physical and emotional well-being over time. From the outside, emotional detachment can look confusing. Someone who once responded instantly now takes hours to reply. Conversations become shorter, emotional reactions become calmer, there are fewer attempts to persuade, explain, or argue. To an observer, this can seem like indifference, but sometimes what appears as indifference is actually acceptance. the recognition that not every relationship can become healthy simply because one person hopes it will. This shift often creates an unexpected reaction in the other person. When attention, reassurance, or emotional availability become less frequent, their absence suddenly becomes noticeable. Behavioral psychology has long shown that people often become more aware of something once it is no longer consistently available. Scarcity can increase perceived value. That does not guarantee renewed love or lasting change, but it helps explain why emotional distance sometimes feels far more significant than constant closeness ever did. The important point is that emotional detachment is not a strategy for controlling someone else. When it is healthy, it is an internal adjustment aimed at protecting one's own well-being. It creates room for clearer thinking, healthier boundaries, and recovery from prolonged stress. Instead of spending every day trying to change another person's behavior, attention gradually returns to personal health, supportive relationships, meaningful goals, and emotional stability. Healing rarely happens overnight. The nervous system needs time to learn that safety is possible again. Types of social connections, restorative sleep, regular physical activity, mindfulness practices, and professional support when needed can all contribute to rebuilding emotional resilience. The brain remains capable of change throughout life, a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. New experiences can reshape old expectations. Perhaps the most powerful truth is this: emotional detachment is not the opposite of love. More often, it is the result of love meeting the limits of human endurance. People are capable of extraordinary compassion, remarkable patience, and incredible forgiveness, but no nervous system is designed to function under endless emotional strain without consequences. Real strength is not measured by how much pain someone can tolerate. It is measured by recognizing when continuing to absorb that pain no longer serves anyone. Sometimes the healthiest decision is not to harden your heart, but to redirect your energy toward relationships built on mutual respect, trust, and care. Because in the end, the most profound consequence is not that someone becomes cruel. It is that they finally stop sacrificing their own well-being to preserve a connection that has been asking them to carry far more than any one person should ever have to bear. The greatest misunderstanding about empathy is that people believe it means saying yes to everything. They imagine a kind person should never disappoint anyone, never refuse a request, never walk away from a relationship, and never choose themselves over someone else's needs. But psychology tells a very different story. Genuine empathy is not the absence of boundaries. In fact, without boundaries, empathy can slowly transform from a gift into a source of emotional exhaustion. Every healthy relationship is built on an invisible structure. You cannot see it, you cannot touch it, but its presence determines whether trust grows or slowly falls apart. That structure is made of boundaries. They define what is acceptable, what is respectful, and what protects the emotional well-being of both people. When those boundaries disappear, even the strongest relationships begin carrying a weight they were never designed to hold. Imagine a bridge built to carry ordinary traffic. Day after day, trucks far heavier than its design begin crossing it. At first, nothing seems wrong. The bridge still stands. Cars continue moving. People assume everything is fine. But deep inside the structure, tiny cracks begin forming. Engineers know that bridges rarely collapse because of one vehicle. They fail because years of accumulated stress weaken the foundation. Human emotions often work the same way. The greatest damage is rarely caused by one painful event. It is created by repeated moments where personal limits are ignored until emotional fatigue becomes impossible to hide. Researchers studying stress have repeatedly found that chronic psychological strain influences far more than mood. Long-term activation of the body's stress response has been associated with disrupted sleep, difficulty concentrating, increased anxiety, elevated blood pressure, weakened immune function, and a greater risk of depression. The body treats prolonged emotional conflict as a significant biological challenge, while stress hormone like cortisol are essential for helping us respond to immediate danger. Remaining in a heightened state for weeks or months can affect both physical and mental health. This is why healthy boundaries are not acts of selfishness, they are acts of nervous system protection. Many people fear setting boundaries because they confuse them with rejection. They worry that saying no means they are becoming cold, uncaring, or difficult. Yet psychologists describe boundaries differently. Healthy boundaries communicate expectations clearly while preserving mutual respect. They protect relationships from resentment by preventing one person's needs from consistently overwhelming another's. Think about what happens inside the brain during repeated emotional sacrifice. Each time someone ignores their own needs to avoid conflict, They may experience temporary relief because the argument has been postponed. But if this pattern continues indefinitely, unresolved frustration often accumulates beneath the surface. Instead of solving the problem, the brain learns that personal needs are consistently less important than maintaining harmony. Over time, this imbalance can contribute to emotional exhaustion and burnout. One of the most remarkable discoveries in neuroscience is that the brain changes in response to repeated experiences. This ability, known as neuroplasticity, allows us to learn, adapt, and recover throughout life. The experiences we repeat most often strengthen corresponding neural pathways. When someone repeatedly practices self-neglect, those habits become increasingly automatic. But the opposite is also true. Legitimately practicing healthy communication, self-respect, and emotional regulation can gradually strengthen healthier behavioral patterns. That means every boundary is more than a conversation. It is also a form of training for the brain. At first, setting limits can feel uncomfortable. Your heart races, your thoughts fill with doubt, you worry about disappointing someone you care about. These reactions are completely understandable. Human beings are deeply social creatures. Our brains are wired to value acceptance and belonging. Saying no can temporarily trigger fears of conflict or rejection. But discomfort does not necessarily mean the decision is wrong. Sometimes discomfort simply reflects that you are replacing an old habit with a healthier one. Notice what happens. In balanced relationships, respect flows in both directions. One person can express a need without fear of punishment. Mistakes are discussed instead of weaponized. Differences become conversations instead of battles. Healthy relationships are not defined by the absence of disagreement. They are defined by the presence of mutual respect during disagreement. This distinction changes everything. Without boundaries, kindness slowly becomes obligation. Compassion becomes responsibility. Love becomes emotional labor performed out of fear rather than genuine choice. Eventually, even the strongest person begins feeling trapped by the very qualities that once made them feel connected to others. But when boundaries become part of a relationship, something remarkable begins happening. Emotional energy returns, decision-making becomes clearer, sleep often improves as chronic stress decreases. Confidence slowly rebuilds because actions finally begin matching personal values instead of constant fear. Instead of spending every day managing another person's reactions, attention shifts toward personal growth, meaningful goals, supportive friendships, and emotional stability. Researchers have consistently found that strong social support predicts better psychological and physical health. Yet healthy support depends on reciprocity. Relationships flourish when both individuals feel valued, respected, and emotionally safe. One-sided sacrifice may appear generous for a time, but it is difficult to sustain without eventually creating resentment or exhaustion. Consider the oxygen mask instruction given before every flight. Passengers are told to secure their own mask before helping someone else. At first, this advice seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't helping others first be more compassionate? The answer is no. Without oxygen, you lose the ability to help anyone. Emotional well-being follows a similar principle. Caring for yourself is not a betrayal of others. It allows compassion to remain genuine instead of becoming unsustainable. There is another reason boundaries matter. They create clarity. People cannot respect limits they never know exist. Calm, honest communication gives others the opportunity to understand expectations and respond accordingly. Healthy boundaries are not walls built to keep everyone out. They are doors with clear rules about how people enter and remain in our lives. Of course, not everyone welcomes boundaries. Some individuals may react with frustration because they were comfortable benefiting from unlimited access to another person's time, attention, or emotional energy. This reaction does not automatically mean boundaries are wrong. Sometimes resistance simply reflects that a familiar pattern is changing. The people who truly value a relationship often adjust. They listen, they communicate, they respect limits even when those limits are inconvenient. Mutual respect strengthens trust because both people know their emotional well-being matters equally. Perhaps the greatest transformation is internal. Instead of measuring your worth by how much you sacrifice, you begin measuring it by how honestly you live. You discover that saying no to unhealthy patterns creates space to say yes to healthier ones. You realize that protecting your peace does not make you less compassionate, it makes your compassion sustainable. The strongest people are not those who absorb endless emotional pain without complaint. They are the ones who recognize that resilience includes recovery, that kindness includes self-respect, and that love flourishes best where boundaries protect the dignity of everyone involved. In the end, healthy empathy is not about carrying every burden that belongs to someone else. It is about walking beside people without losing yourself in the process. Because the most enduring form of compassion is not endless self-sacrifice. It is the courage to care deeply for others while remembering that your own well-being deserves the very same care, patience, and respect.